Looking back at it now, I think Black Ops 4 might be one of the most overhated zombies entries. And now I know that might sound like a conflict from other things I've said about other games in the Black Ops Zombies series. How I've mentioned that Black Ops 2, while looking back on it fondly now, might actually be a little bit overrated. Or how I've gone on record multiple times in saying that Black Ops 3 is easily the best entry in the entire series. Everyone's going to have a different opinion about which games are good, which games are bad, and which games fall in between. Now, in my opinion, that ranking is Black Ops 3, then Black Ops 1, then 4, then 7, then 2, then 6, then Cold War all the way at the bottom of the list. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to ask, how is Black Ops 4 your third favorite in the entire series? It was such a buggy mess. It ended the storyline in a very sloppy way. It had a terrible budget. It removed CGI cutscenes. It felt cheap. It was basically just a bunch of remasters. And yeah, these things are all absolutely true. But I'm also a big fan of the Blundell era of zombies. And Black Ops 4 was the last glimpse we really got of that Blundell era and the Blundell storyline that followed through the Ether storyline originally. It has a lot of the same benefits going for it that Black Ops 3 does. I think the gameplay is very similar. I think the map design is very similar. I think the storyline carries on pretty healthily. And I still personally think it's fun to go back and play now. That being said, it has a lot of problems. And I'm not going to ignore any of those problems. I'm going to put them out here and I'm going to acknowledge them forthright. While I'm a PC player, I do understand that on consoles it was an extremely buggy mess that crashed all the time. The Easter egg hunts were an absolute wreck. The Chaos storyline really, to me, wasn't all that interesting. It introduced new characters that have never been acknowledged by Treyarch again past Black Ops 4. And even though it started off fairly strong with our Ether storyline, it ended in a super disappointing and kind of unsatisfying way. It was also ridiculously easy, almost on par with something like Cold War, where you could take advantage of kill streaks, except for in Black Ops 4, it made it so that a rocket launcher essentially became a wonder weapon and that anybody and everybody could go for high round strategies by abusing a mix of map glitches, zombie pileups, and super overpowered weapons. It's also attached to a super predatory Call of Duty Black Ops entry in the franchise with microtransactions, and one that was plagued by budget cuts and crunch deadlines for the entire dev team, meaning what we got was a really rushed and buggy, bad experience overall. Black Ops 4's multiplayer was essentially completely redesigned from the ground up in the last few weeks of game development. The campaign was completely scrapped from the game in favor of focusing on Blackout, an attempt to chase Fortnite's Battle Royale craze at the time, and almost all of the budget was taken away from zombies, meaning that cutscenes were completely cut out and replaced with comic book style 2D cutscene transitions. Character voice lines were repeated across maps. Easter eggs were cut down and watered down into the worst versions of themselves. Endings were being leaked because of sloppy game development, leaving files in the code that shouldn't have been there. The weapon selections sucked, and post-launch content was not that great. And all of the new Ether maps were all remakes. And yes, while the Chaos storyline did bring us cool, new, unique map ideas, like being on a zombified Titanic, going to an old haunted mansion, or fighting the literal gods, the Ether storyline, on the other hand, brought us through a remake of Mob of the Dead, a remake of 5, a remake of Nuketown Zombies, and a remake of Call of the Dead. Great maps on their own, but nobody asked for remakes 2 games later. You're meaning to tell me that Treyarch's grand idea to end off this massive storyline they'd been building up for 10 years was to bring back 3 maps that they had just made about 4 to 5 years prior? Black Ops 3 just came off the high of some of the coolest and most unique maps that most folks rank at the top of their tier lists across the board. And in exchange, what we get are a bunch of remakes of maps from 3 games ago and 2 games ago that nobody really asked for remakes of. So yeah, the game's got a lot of problems. It had a lot of flaws, it had a lot of issues. It wasn't a super inspiring or overly creative game. But at that same time, I still think a lot of the hate that it gets these days is undeserved. It was attached to a really bad Call of Duty entry in the franchise. Nobody's going to deny that Black Ops 4 might be one of the worst entries in the Call of Duty Black Ops series. And even then, I still think it's a fairly good game when it's ranked against other Call of Duty games. It's just a weaker showing in the Black Ops series. And unfortunately / fortunately was the trigger that ultimately led to Activision essentially rebooting the entire Call of Duty franchise and bringing us into Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019 and the newer style of COD games that we have now. You do kind of have to be on a historically bad run of games in order to get your entire franchise rebooted from the ground up. All that to say, I think Black Ops 4 is still a fairly fun game, and I think its Zombies mode stands on its own as a unique and interesting attempt at trying to recreate what the Zombies experience was from Black Ops 3, one of the most hyped up and best entries in the game, while also incorporating new and unique gameplay mechanics that just weren't that well received and didn't land that well. It's hard to go in the 4th entry in the Black Ops series and the 5th entry in the Treyarch Zombies mode by taking away some of the classic perks that had already existed for so many years prior, changing up the weapon mechanics and systems, making the main crew a half-baked story alongside a new crew that no one really cares about all that much, and making a bunch of remakes of maps when you just came off a game that had a bunch of super cool unique maps that were brand new and fresh takes. I think the game would have been infinitely better received if they would have kept Juggernog in the game as standard and kept Speed Cola in instead of making it a 4-perk special unlock. And I also think it would have been better received if they didn't try to mess with a formula that was already pretty well established. Equally so, while they remade some of my favorite maps, I think Call of the Dead is phenomenal, so I'm super happy that Togder Toten came in. I loved 5 from Black Ops 1, so I was super happy with Classified. And I absolutely think that Treyarch thought that Blood of the Dead was going to be well better received than it actually was, because Mob of the Dead, the map in which it's remaking, is universally ranked as one of the best zombies maps of all time alongside Origins. But unfortunately, doing those things alongside making sweeping changes to the mode and continuing on with historically unpopular, overcomplicated Easter eggs that were so broken you couldn't actually finish them properly, and putting this all into the buggiest game in the Black Ops series that was so unplayable that people couldn't finish the game properly, just didn't work out well. Now, of course, post-game patches and trying to fix a lot of the bugs that came on that launch version of the game can be acknowledged as helping the game get a better reception over time, but a lot of folks remember that initial experience, how it was when the game first came out. Something that I think Black Ops 2, on the other hand, something that had a very buggy launch but got fixed down the line, does get the benefit of the doubt from. Black Ops 4 doesn't. And I think if you take into account the factors around Black Ops 4 and what made the zombies mode in that game perform the way that it did, while also taking into account what the history of the Call of Duty franchise has looked like post Black Ops 4, I think a lot of the hate around that game is undeserved. Now, not all of it, of course. I do think it deserves a lot of criticism. Criticism is due where it's needed. But it's not a terrible entry in the franchise, and it's not a terrible entry in the series. Now, this part's purely subjective, but I do think it is leagues beyond some of the future entries that we've gotten in the series, like Black Ops Cold War or Call of Duty Vanguard, which does unfortunately fall under the Treyarch Zombies category because it was primarily developed by Treyarch, even though the main game it was attached to was not their game and not a Black Ops entry in the series. But again, ultimately, games that came down the line that are much worse than Call of Duty Black Ops 4 was, don't get the same level of treatment that Black Ops 4 does. You almost never see anybody going back to Call of Duty Black Ops 4. The maps in Black Ops 4 don't really have any staying power, and they don't typically come up in a lot of conversations around the Treyarch Zombies mode. Most folks skip over Black Ops 4, go back to Black Ops 3, or skip ahead to some of the newer mainline franchise entries. And unfortunately, because of the low budget, the storyline itself is really kind of forgotten, other than the final map and the ending of the Togder Toten Easter egg. Now yes, it was a super lore-heavy game. It was super focused on trying to do the storyline where it didn't really have the budget to do it, and it did bring in my opinion, some super cool maps and remakes of maps, but would have been better suited as something like a Zombies Chronicles 2, not mainline DLC entries that were paid add-ons to the game. That being said, when you take into account that it was a lower budget version of Call of Duty Zombies, albeit a mainline entry in the franchise, it did the best that it could with what it had. Jason Blundell, who directed the historically popular story of Black Ops 3, was on his way out with Black Ops 4 the same way that Jimmy Zielinski was on his way out with Black Ops 2, so he was creatively disconnected from most of the game mode and handing it over to new leadership, and the developers themselves were budget constrained and restricted to working on things like Blackout because Activision wanted to pour all of their money into a cash cow battle royale mode. When you take those factors into account, a lot of the hate on Black Ops 4 feels forced. When you look at it as a lower budget, restricted version of the mode, you can acknowledge the highlights of it a little bit more. You can look at the fact that even though they're remakes of a bunch of fan favorite maps, and they're not introducing anything super new to the game mode, they're still cool remakes. They're still fun to play. And yes, the storyline was watered down from what it should have been, but they were working with what they had. Ultimately, I think the point that I'm getting at here is that Black Ops 4 is not the fault of Treyarch. The reason why Black Ops 4 ended up the way it did was because of corporate greed and actions made by Activision. And the publisher is not the developer. Activision ultimately was the team that decided to take the money away from the mode. Activision ultimately are the ones that decided to put those developers on the mode they wanted them on, Blackout. Treyarch, the developers themselves and the creatives behind this mode, did what they could with Black Ops 4. And I think for what they had available to them and the resources they were given, they made a pretty solid attempt at an entry at the franchise. And I think Black Ops 4 still holds up pretty well today, even being attached to a pretty substandard version of a Black Ops entry in the Call of Duty franchise. And a lot of the hate that Black Ops 4 gets, well, fully well deserved for actions that Activision did, shouldn't reflect on the game mode that Treyarch was able to deliver with what they had. And I know I'm going to sound like some corporate shill trying to justify a poor entry in a gaming series by saying that Treyarch is just some small and underprivileged team that was doing what they could with what they had. Sure, I get it and I fully accept that criticism. But that being said, I appreciate what what Treyarch has done for nearly 2 decades now with the Call of Duty Zombies franchise. And I see Black Ops 4 not as a failure of the Black Ops series, but as a failure of Activision not giving Treyarch the resources they need to make a fair entry in the game mode, especially one that was poised to be the epic finale to a storyline that fans were dedicated to, and the reason why people kept coming back to the mode, and just gave Activision only a few months prior one of the largest DLC releases that anyone had ever seen in any game, hands down, not just Call of Duty. To take those resources away from this mode was a massive failure on their part. Not something that I think we can blame Treyarch for, but something that we should still be pointing a finger at Activision for today, because those same business practices that caused Black Ops 4 to be the disappointment it was are the exact same business practices that Activision are still carrying out today with Call of Duty Warzone and every new entry in the Call of Duty series. Now, somehow right now, Activision is managing to turn that bus around a little bit. They're giving us a really solid entry in the series with Black Ops 7, and I think there may be a possibility that we're returning to the form that Black Ops 3 gave us. But I want to hold my breath, I want to bite my tongue for a second and not give them too much credit, because I've seen this story before, I've seen where this has gone, and I'm worried we might get burned again. But I suppose that's something only time can tell. What are your thoughts? Do you think Black Ops 4 is an overhated entry in the series, or do you think it's overrated? Drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts. And of course, if you like this style of commentary and you want to see me do more of these, drop a comment or give me a like and let me know. That's all I've got for now, and we'll see you in the next one.